The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber opened with a deep rumble that echoed through the enormous space. Ambassador Sarah Chen walked through them with steady steps, her black diplomatic uniform a stark contrast to the colorful robes and natural forms of the alien beings seated in the curved rows above her. The chamber could hold representatives from 50 different worlds, but today only 12 species had come to decide humanity's fate. Chen's boots clicked against the polished floor as she made her way to the central speaking platform. Around her the air filled with the sounds of alien communication. The Velthari clicked their mandibles in what she had learned meant disapproval. The crystal-like Zephyrians hummed low notes that vibrated through her bones. The Aquatic Confederation delegates made gurgling sounds through their breathing apparatus. All of it felt hostile. She had been fighting this war for 3 years. The Kethvar Empire had attacked human colonies without warning, burning entire cities and enslaving survivors. Humanity had been forced to respond with everything they had. Their military doctrine was simple and brutal compared to the elaborate rules of engagement that other species followed. Where aliens would spend months in careful tactical maneuvers, humans struck fast and hit hard. Where other species tried to minimize casualties on both sides, humans focused on ending conflicts quickly to save their own people. It had worked. The Kethvar Empire, which had been expanding across the galaxy for decades, finally faced an enemy that fought back with such determination that they were pushed back, system after system. For the first time in 50 years, the aggressive empire was losing ground. That was what brought them to the negotiating table, and that was what made the council nervous. Ambassador Zixth of the Velthari rose from his seat high above the chamber floor. His insect-like form gleamed under the artificial lights as he began to speak in the common galactic language. His words were translated instantly into human English through Chen's communication implant. The Galactic Council has reviewed the conflict between the Terran Federation and the Kethvar Empire. We have reached a decision that will bring peace to this troubled region of space. Chen remained silent, waiting. She already knew what was coming. The preliminary meetings had made it clear that the Council saw humanity as the problem, not the Kethvar. The terms of peace are as follows. Zixith continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone who believed he spoke for civilization itself. First, the Terran Federation will return all occupied Kethvar territories taken during the conflict. Second, humanity will pay reparations to the Kethvar Empire for damages caused by their excessive military actions. Third, the Terran Federation will accept Council oversight of their military forces to ensure future conflicts are conducted according to civilized standards. A murmur of approval rippled through the chamber. Chen felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her expression neutral. These terms were not just insulting, they were impossible. Humanity had lost millions of people to Kethvar aggression. They had spent enormous resources defending themselves and pushing back an enemy that showed no mercy to civilians. Now the Council wanted them to give back the ground they had won with human blood and pay the attackers for the privilege. Zixith was not finished. The Council recognizes that humanity is new to galactic civilization. You have been among the stars for only 2 centuries. It is understandable that your methods remain primitive. But the galaxy operates according to rules that have maintained peace for thousands of years. War must be conducted with honor. Conflicts must be resolved through negotiation and compromise. The strong must show mercy to the weak. Another representative stood up. This one was from the Ethereal Collective, beings of pure energy who rarely involved themselves in physical conflicts. When they spoke, their words seemed to come from the air itself. Humanity's approach to warfare is disturbing to all civilized species. Your tactics show no regard for the traditional rules of engagement. You target military and civilian infrastructure, without distinction. You use weapons designed to cause maximum psychological impact on your enemies. These methods may be effective, but they are barbaric. Chen had heard this criticism many times. Yes, humans fought differently. When the Kethvar attacked a human colony, they did not just target military bases. They would orbital bombard cities, enslave populations, and destroy anything of cultural value. So when humans fought back, they made sure the enemy understood the cost of aggression. They destroyed Kethvar supply lines, communications networks, and manufacturing centers. They made it clear that attacking humanity meant total war, not the limited conflicts that other species seemed to prefer. The Aquatic Confederation representative spoke next, their words bubbling through their translator. The Kethvar Empire has agreed to these terms. They are willing to accept a negotiated peace and return to their pre-war borders. All that remains is for humanity to accept the wisdom of the Council and agree to these reasonable conditions. Reasonable. Chen almost laughed at the word. It was reasonable to let the aggressors keep most of what they had gained before the war started. It was reasonable to make the victims pay reparations to their attackers. It was reasonable to place the only military force that had successfully stopped Kethvar expansion under the control of species who had done nothing while colonies burned. Ambassador Chen, Zixith said, his tone suggesting that her answer was merely a formality. The Galactic Council awaits humanity's response to these terms. I trust that Earth's government will see the wisdom in accepting the guidance of more experienced civilizations. Chen looked around the chamber one more time. These beings represented thousands of worlds and trillions of lives. Their civilizations had existed when humanity was still discovering fire. They had technologies that seemed like magic and wisdom gained over millennia, but they had also watched the Kethvar Empire grow stronger and more aggressive for decades, while doing nothing but sending diplomatic protests. She thought about the human colonies that had been destroyed in the first months of the war. She thought about the families who had lost everything to Kethvar aggression. She thought about the soldiers who had died pushing the enemy back, believing they were protecting not just humanity, but the innocent species that the Council claimed to represent. Finally, Chen activated her own communication system, ensuring that her words would be recorded and transmitted to every human world. Ambassador Zixith, distinguished representatives of the Galactic Council, I have consulted with the government of the Terran Federation. Our answer is simple. The chamber fell completely silent. Even the constant background hum of environmental systems seemed to pause. Humanity respectfully declines these terms. We withdraw from these negotiations and from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. The reaction was instant and explosive. Alien voices filled the chamber in a dozen different languages. The Zephyrians' harmonics rose to a painful pitch. The Velthari's clicking became so rapid it sounded like machinery breaking down. Several representatives stood up at once, gesturing wildly as they tried to speak over each other. Chen turned and began walking toward the exit. Behind her, she could hear Zixith's voice rising above the chaos. This is impossible. No species leaves the Council. You are making a mistake that will destroy your civilization. She paused at the doorway and looked back one more time. Perhaps, she said calmly, but it will be our mistake to make. As the great doors closed behind her, Chen heard Zixith's final words echoing through the chamber. Your isolation will be your doom, primitive mammals. Chen smiled grimly as she walked toward her ship. They would see who was truly primitive when this was over. 6 months had passed since Ambassador Chen walked out of the Galactic Council chambers, and the galaxy was beginning to realize that something was very wrong with their expectations. The Council members had been certain that humanity would come, back within weeks, desperate to rejoin galactic civilization. Instead, human space had become completely silent. At first, the silence seemed normal. Trade routes that had connected human worlds to alien markets simply stopped operating. Human diplomatic missions closed their doors and recalled their staff. The few alien traders who had been doing business with Earth's colonies found their contracts canceled, and their ships politely but firmly escorted out of human space. But as weeks turned into months, the silence became something more disturbing. Long-range sensors that had always been able to detect the normal communications chatter from human worlds now picked up nothing. Not even basic navigation signals or emergency beacons. It was as if an entire civilization had simply vanished. The borders of human space became visible in a way they had never been before. Massive defensive platforms appeared at every jump point and hyperspace route that led to human territory. These platforms were unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. They were larger than most alien battleships and bristled with weapons that defied easy classification. Automated warning messages broadcast in dozens of languages whenever any ship approached. Human space. Entry prohibited. Any vessel entering human territory without authorization will be destroyed without warning. Captain Velnock of the Velthari Exploration Service had been one of the first to test these warnings. His science vessel had approached a human border station, hoping to establish some kind of communication. The response had been swift and terrifying. His ship's sensors had detected weapons locks from at least 50 different targeting systems, before he had even come within visual range of the platform. The warning message had repeated exactly once before his navigation officer, panic clear in his voice, had begged him to retreat. Trade Federation economic analysts were reporting massive disruptions across multiple sectors. Human technology had been crude compared to some species, but it had been cheap and reliable. Their agricultural exports had fed dozens of worlds. Their raw materials had supplied manufacturing centers across the galaxy. Now, all of that was gone, leaving shortages and economic chaos in its wake. Even more disturbing were the intelligence reports. The few long-range scans that could penetrate the outer edges of human space showed massive construction projects on every human world. Energy signatures indicated industrial expansion on a scale that seemed impossible for a species that had only been in space for 2 centuries. Whatever the humans were building, they were building a lot of it. Council Intelligence Director Kelnara had called an emergency meeting with the Council leadership to discuss the situation. She was a member of the Ethereal Collective, and her energy-based form flickered with anxiety as she presented her findings. The humans are not behaving according to any historical precedent, she reported to the assembled ambassadors. When species leave the Council, they typically maintain basic diplomatic and trade relationships. They remain part of galactic civilization, just outside the formal government structure, but humanity has completely isolated themselves. Ambassador Zixith listened to the report with growing irritation. He had been certain that the humans would realize their mistake quickly. Their civilization was too young and too primitive to survive without the guidance and protection of the Council. They are bluffing, he declared. No species can survive in complete isolation. Their economy will collapse. Their technology will stagnate. They will come back, and when they do, the terms will be even less favorable than before. But even as Zixith spoke those words, news was arriving that would change everything. The Kethvar Empire, emboldened by what they saw as the Council's weakness in letting humanity escape consequences, had resumed their expansion. Their first target was the Zephyrian Crystal Gardens, a peaceful system of crystal-based life forms who had never developed military technology. The attack was sudden and brutal. Kethvar warships dropped out of hyperspace around the main Zephyrian world without warning. The crystalline beings tried to surrender immediately, but the Kethvar were not interested in prisoners. They wanted the rare crystals that formed the Zephyrians' bodies, crystals that were valuable for advanced electronics and energy storage. Within 72 hours, the Zephyrian civilization was effectively extinct. Those who survived the initial attack were harvested like crops, their crystal bodies broken down for their component materials. The harmonics that had filled their system for thousands of years went silent. The Council called an emergency session. For the first time in decades, real fear filled the chamber. The Kethvar had shown that they were not interested in the limited warfare that galactic civilization had practiced for centuries. They were willing to commit complete genocide to get what they wanted. We must demand that humanity honor their mutual defense treaties, declared the representative from the Aquatic Confederation. They are bound by law to assist member species under attack. Zixith agreed immediately. Yes, surely even the humans will not abandon innocent civilians to slaughter. We will send a formal request for military assistance. The message was composed carefully, emphasizing the humanitarian crisis and the legal obligations that humanity had agreed to when they first joined the Council. It was transmitted on all frequencies, carried by the fastest Council ships to the human border. The response came within hours, broadcast simultaneously to every Council world and every news service in the galaxy. The signal originated from multiple human systems, suggesting a level of coordination that made intelligence analysts nervous. The message was simple, delivered by an automated communication system that showed no images, only text and a cold mechanical voice. The Terran Federation is no longer bound by Galactic Council treaties or obligations. All previous agreements are void as of the date of our withdrawal from Council membership. Direct all concerns to your local Council representative. The message repeated 3 times, and then the communication channels went silent again. News of the Zephyrian genocide spread through the galaxy like a shockwave. Species that had not worried about military defense for centuries suddenly began to wonder if they were next. The Kethvar Empire had shown that the Council's authority meant nothing to those willing to use unlimited force. More desperate messages were sent to human space. The Aquatic Confederation offered lucrative trade deals. The insectoid hives promised to share their biotechnology secrets. The Velthari offered to formally apologize for their treatment of humanity in the peace negotiations. Some species even offered to leave the Council themselves and form a new alliance with Earth. All of these messages disappeared into the silence of human space without any response. Meanwhile, Kethvar forces continued their advance. 3 more systems fell within a month. Each conquest was more brutal than the last. as if the Empire was deliberately showing the galaxy what happened to those who could not defend themselves. Trade routes became dangerous as Kethvar raiders expanded their operations. Refugee ships filled with survivors from conquered worlds struggled to find safe harbor. The Council tried to organize a military response, but their combined fleets were designed for peacekeeping, not real warfare. Against Kethvar battle tactics, they were almost helpless. Director Kelnara updated her intelligence reports with growing alarm. The Kethvar military has adapted their strategy based on their experience fighting humans. They are using weapons and tactics that they learned from that conflict. In essence, they learned how to fight a real war from their battles with Earth's forces. Zixith felt a cold realization settling over him. Are you saying that our attempt to limit human military methods actually made our enemies stronger? That appears to be the case. The Kethvar studied human tactics and incorporated them into their own doctrine. The difference is that they are using these methods for conquest while humans use them for defense. As another system fell to Kethvar forces, one question haunted every council meeting. Where were the humans? They had the only military force that had ever successfully fought the Empire to a standstill. Their weapons and tactics could turn the tide of the war, but they remained silent behind their borders, watching as the galaxy burned. The silence from human space was no longer just mysterious. It had become terrifying, not because of what the humans might do, but because of what they were clearly choosing not to do. 1 year after humanity's withdrawal from the Galactic Council, Intelligence Director Kelnara made a discovery that would change everything the galaxy thought they knew about their former human allies. She had been analyzing long-range sensor data from the edges of human space, trying to understand what the mysterious industrial expansion actually meant. The energy readings made no sense according to standard galactic understanding of physics and engineering. Human worlds were showing power generation levels that exceeded anything in their previous technological profiles by orders of magnitude. Manufacturing signatures suggested they were building something massive, but the construction patterns were unlike anything in the Council's databases. What made it even more puzzling was the speed. Human technology had been considered primitive but reliable, like simple tools that did their job without fancy features. But these readings suggested technological advancement at a pace that should have been impossible. It was as if humanity had jumped forward several centuries of development in just 12 months. Kelnara called for a meeting with the Council's most experienced scientists and military analysts. The conference room filled with representatives from 6 different species, each bringing their unique perspective on the puzzle of human space. Dr. Klix of the Velthari Technical Analysis Division was the first to speak. The power generation alone is disturbing. Our estimates suggest that some human worlds are producing more energy than entire star systems did before their isolation. Either they have discovered new physics, or they are preparing for something that requires massive amounts of power. The Zephyrian researcher who had replaced their murdered colleague harmonized nervously. The construction pattern suggests they are building ships, many ships, but the designs do not match anything in our databases of human vessels from before their withdrawal. Even more troubling were reports from the few traders and scouts who had managed to observe human fleet movements near the border systems. The ships looked wrong. Where human vessels had once been bulky and functional, built like industrial equipment rather than elegant spacecraft, the new designs were sleek and deadly. They moved through space with a speed and grace that defied the laws of physics as the Council understood them. Captain Velnok, who had been monitoring human border activities since the isolation began, provided the most disturbing intelligence of all. 3 of our deep space reconnaissance probes have disappeared while observing human fleet movements. Not destroyed in any conventional sense. They simply vanished from all sensors simultaneously, as if they had never existed. That should be impossible, protested the Aquatic Confederation's technology specialist. Our phase shift reconnaissance probes exist partially outside normal space. They cannot be detected by conventional sensors, much less destroyed by them. Nevertheless, Captain Velnok replied grimly, they are gone. While the Council struggled to understand what humanity was doing behind their borders, the Kethvar Empire continued its rampage across the galaxy. Their latest target was New Harmony, a garden world that served as home to 2.3 billion civilians from 7 different species. It was one of the most diverse and peaceful worlds in the galaxy, a symbol of what different species could accomplish when they worked together. The defense of New Harmony had been placed under the command of Admiral Kreshatar, one of the Council's most experienced military leaders. He commanded a fleet of over 200 ships from multiple species, the largest military force the Council had ever assembled for a single battle. The Kethvar arrived with only 50 vessels, but they moved with a coordination and brutal efficiency that shocked the defending forces. Instead of the traditional approach of formal challenges and gradual escalation that characterized galactic warfare, they struck like a predator attacking prey. The battle lasted only 6 hours. When it was over, the Council fleet was shattered. Admiral Kreshitar's flagship was a drifting wreck, and the Admiral himself was missing, presumed dead. New Harmony's orbital defenses were destroyed, leaving the planet defenseless against bombardment. The massacre that followed was broadcast across the galaxy. The Kethvar did not simply conquer New Harmony. They made an example of it. Cities were burned from orbit. Refugee ships trying to evacuate civilians were hunted down and destroyed for sport. The cultural centers and museums that had made New Harmony famous were specifically targeted for destruction. In the council chambers, panic had replaced the careful diplomatic traditions of millennia. Representatives shouted over each other in multiple languages. Some demanded immediate military action. Others called for negotiation with the Kethvar. A few suggested abandoning the outer systems entirely and consolidating defenses around the core worlds. Ambassador Zixith found himself in the impossible position of proposing something that had become unthinkable over the past year. "We must request human assistance," he said, his voice barely audible over the chaos in the chamber. The reaction was immediate. Half the representatives began speaking at once, expressing outrage at the idea. The other half fell silent, considering the implications of what Zixith was suggesting. "You propose that we beg help from the species you called primitive?" demanded the ethereal collective representative. "The same beings you said would destroy themselves through isolation?" Zixith's mandibles clicked nervously as he responded. "The situation has changed. The Kethvar threat is greater than we anticipated. Humanity has the only military force that has successfully fought them to a standstill. Surely they will not abandon innocent civilians to genocide." The formal request was drafted with desperate care. It acknowledged humanity's withdrawal from the Council while appealing to their basic morality and sense of justice. The message emphasized the humanitarian crisis and the threat to innocent life. It was sent on every communication frequency that could reach human space, carried by diplomatic ships that approached as close to human borders as they dared. The response came within hours, but not in the way the Council expected. Instead of a private diplomatic communication, humanity's answer was broadcast across every world in the galaxy simultaneously. The signal was powerful enough to override local communication networks, ensuring that every being with access to information would see the message. The image showed Sarah Chen, but she looked different from the diplomat who had walked out of the council chambers a year ago. She wore the uniform of a military officer, with insignia that indicated the highest possible rank. Her title, displayed in multiple languages, was President of the Terran Federation. Her message was brief and delivered with the same calm tone she had used in the council chambers, but the words carried a weight that made the galaxy pause. 1 year ago, the Galactic Council informed humanity that our methods of warfare were barbaric and primitive. You demanded that we compromise with genocidal aggressors. You insisted that we accept civilized defeat rather than primitive victory. You labeled our determination to protect our people as evidence of our moral failure. Chen paused, looking directly into the camera with eyes that seemed to see into the soul of every being watching. You made your choice about what civilization means. You chose compromise over justice. You chose process over results. You chose the appearance of peace over the reality of security. Her voice remained calm, but there was something in her tone that made listeners across the galaxy feel a chill of fear. We made a different choice. We chose to step away from your version of civilization and build our own. You called us primitive, so we embraced that primitive understanding that some things are worth fighting for without compromise. The image of Chen was replaced by scenes of the New Harmony massacre, footage that the Kethvar themselves had broadcast as a warning to other worlds. You are now discovering the price of civilized weakness when faced with primitive strength. The Kethvar learned to fight from their battles with us, but they fight for conquest while we fought for survival. The difference is that we never forgot why we were fighting. Chen's image returned to the screen for her final words. You demanded that we accept your wisdom about civilization. Very well. You made your choice and we made ours. Handle your own barbarism. The transmission ended, leaving the galaxy in stunned silence. In the council chambers, Zixith stared at the blank screen where humanity's message had been displayed. A terrible understanding was beginning to dawn on him. The humans had not retreated from the galaxy in defeat or isolation. They had withdrawn to prepare for something else entirely. The question was no longer whether humanity would return to save the galaxy. The question was what they intended to do when they finally emerged from behind their borders. The images of New Harmony's destruction had shaken something fundamental in the galactic consciousness. For the first time in thousands of years, civilian populations across hundreds of worlds were questioning whether their governments could actually protect them. The careful diplomatic solutions that had worked for millennia seemed useless against an enemy that simply ignored the rules of civilized warfare. On the crystal worlds that had once been home to the Zephyrians, refugee camps filled with survivors from a dozen different species. These beings had escaped various Keithavar attacks, and they shared stories that terrified the galaxy. The Empire was not just conquering territory anymore. They were systematically destroying anything that represented the old galactic order. In these camps, something unprecedented began to happen. Civilian populations that had never considered violence as a solution to any problem began forming defense groups. The Aquatic Confederation's peaceful traders started pooling resources to buy weapons. Ethereal collective members, who existed as pure energy and had never needed physical defenses, began learning how to manipulate matter to create barriers and weapons. The Council tried to maintain order, but their authority was crumbling. When they declared that civilian weapons purchases were illegal without proper permits, entire populations ignored them. When they insisted that military action must be coordinated through official channels, spontaneous defense militias formed anyway. On the world of Keth Prime, which served as a refugee center for survivors from 6 different systems, the situation reached a crisis point. Kethvar raiders had been spotted at the edge of the system, and the official Council Defense Force consisted of exactly 12 lightly armed patrol boats. The refugee leader, a Zephyrian crystal singer named Harmony of Deep Tones, made a decision that would change galactic history. Instead of waiting for the Council to send help that might never come, she sent a direct message to human space. The message was simple and desperate. We are not asking you to save us. We are asking you to teach us to save ourselves. The response came within hours, transmitted on a tight beam communication that bypassed all Council monitoring systems. It contained complete technical specifications for advanced plasma rifles, personal shield generators, and portable missile systems. The designs were elegant, efficient, and deadly. More importantly, they could be manufactured using common industrial equipment that most worlds already possessed. Along with the technical data came a single message: defend yourselves. No one else will. Word of the human weapon design spread through refugee networks faster than the Council could react. Within days, similar transmissions were being received by civilian groups on dozens of worlds. The humans were not giving military aid directly, but they were enabling others to build their own defense forces. The weapons themselves were a revelation. Human military technology had always been considered crude but effective, like using a hammer where other species might use a precision tool. But these new designs showed a level of sophistication that shocked alien engineers. They were simple, enough for civilians to manufacture and maintain, but powerful enough to stop Kethvar battle armor. The Council called emergency sessions to try to halt the spread of human weapons technology, but it was already too late. Manufacturing plants across the galaxy had switched production to plasma rifles and missile launchers. Defense militias that had formed in desperation now found themselves armed with weapons that made their old Council-approved defenses look like children's toys. The first test of these new weapons came when Kethvar raiders attacked the industrial world of Velnash. They expected to find the usual poorly defended civilian population, armed with nothing more dangerous than mining equipment. Instead, they encountered an entire planet that had been preparing for their arrival. The battle was unlike anything in galactic history. Civilian defense groups used human-designed weapons with a desperation and fury that the Kethvar had never faced before. Mining stations became fortified positions. Cargo ships were converted into gunships using human weapon designs. Even children too young to fight were involved in manufacturing ammunition and maintaining equipment. The Kethvar raiders, who had grown accustomed to easy victories against defenseless populations, found themselves facing an entire world that refused to surrender. Their superior numbers and military training meant nothing against an enemy that was willing to turn every building into a fortress and every civilian into a soldier. After 3 days of brutal fighting, the surviving Kethvar forces retreated in confusion. They had never encountered resistance like this. The human weapons were effective, but more importantly, the human approach to warfare had been adopted by the defenders. They fought not to win according to the rules, but to survive, at any cost. News of the victory at Velnash spread across the galaxy like wildfire. More importantly, detailed tactical reports began circulating through the same underground networks that had spread the weapon designs. Other worlds learned not just how to build human weapons, but how to use them effectively. The Aquatic Confederation used human torpedo designs to destroy an entire Kethvar battle fleet that was attacking their homeworld. The water-dwelling species had always been pacifists, but when faced with extinction, they proved that they could learn to be deadly when necessary. Their torpedoes moved through space like schools of predatory fish, overwhelming Kethvar Point defenses through sheer numbers and coordination. The insectoid hives, who had never developed effective fighter craft because their military doctrine emphasized ground combat, suddenly fielded swarms of small, fast attack ships based on human designs. These fighters proved almost impossible for Kethvar sensors to track individually, and they struck with the coordinated precision that only hive minds could achieve. Even the ethereal collective, who had always considered themselves above physical warfare, began incorporating human weapons concepts into their energy-based defense systems. Their new barrier weapons could stop Kethvar plasma bolts and redirect the energy back at the attackers. System after system that had seemed doomed to fall before the Kethvar advance suddenly began pushing back. The Empire found itself facing not just individual worlds with better weapons, but an entire galaxy that had learned to fight with the desperate efficiency that humanity had demonstrated during their own war. In the council chambers, Ambassador Zixith watched intelligence reports with growing amazement and horror. The same species that had criticized human military methods were now using identical tactics with devastating effectiveness. Worse, they were combining human weapons technology with their own natural advantages to create military capabilities that exceeded anything the galaxy had ever seen. "They are learning," he said to Director Kelnara during a private meeting. "The humans are not fighting this war themselves. They are teaching every other species to fight it for them." Kelnara's energy form flickered with anxiety. "The implications are staggering. Humanity has created a galactic military doctrine without firing a single shot. They have turned every species in the galaxy into potential warriors." The intelligence reports painted a clear picture. The Kethvar Empire, which had seemed unstoppable just months earlier, was now losing ground on multiple fronts. Their military advantages based on superior discipline and advanced weapons meant nothing against enemies who fought with human-level determination and human-designed equipment. More disturbing was what the alien populations were becoming. Species that had been peaceful for thousands of years were developing military cultures that emphasized the same values that had made humanity effective: protecting their people at any cost, using overwhelming force to end conflicts quickly, and refusing to accept defeat while they still had the ability to fight. The galaxy was learning to be human in its approach to warfare, and the results were terrifying to anyone who remembered how effectively humans had fought when they were forced to defend themselves. The Kethvar Empire was discovering what humanity had tried to teach the Council a year earlier. There was a significant difference between being peaceful and being harmless. The galaxy had been peaceful for millennia, but now it was learning to be dangerous when peace was no longer possible. The question that haunted every council meeting was whether they had created something that could be controlled once the current crisis was over. They had called human methods primitive and barbaric, but now those same methods were spreading to every corner of galactic civilization. The humans had kept their promise. They were not saving the galaxy. They were teaching the galaxy to save itself. And in doing so, they had fundamentally changed what galactic civilization meant. The war ended not with grand ceremonies or formal surrender documents, but with the complete collapse of the Kethvar Empire's ability to continue fighting. Their final stronghold, a fortress world that had been thought impregnable, fell to a coalition force of 7 different species, all armed with weapons based on human designs and fighting with tactics that would have made their human teachers proud. The siege lasted only 18 hours. The attacking forces used human-style combined arms tactics, coordinating orbital bombardment with ground assault forces and psychological warfare. They did not try to minimize casualties among the defenders or preserve the infrastructure of the fortress world. They simply applied overwhelming force until resistance ended. When the Kethvar leadership finally surrendered, they did so unconditionally. There were no negotiations, no diplomatic compromises, and no face-saving measures. The empire that had terrorized the galaxy for decades simply ceased to exist as a military force. In the aftermath, as the galaxy tried to process what had happened, a new reality was becoming clear. The war had changed more than just political boundaries. It had fundamentally altered how galactic civilization understood the relationship between peace and strength. Trade routes that had been disrupted by the war were re-establishing themselves, but not always through the traditional council-controlled systems. Many species had begun trading directly with human space, even though humanity still maintained their isolation from formal galactic government. These new trade relationships operated according to agreements that prioritized efficiency and mutual benefit over diplomatic protocol. Half the military forces in the galaxy had been reorganized according to human-style doctrines. The old council approach to warfare, with its emphasis on limited engagement and diplomatic resolution, had been abandoned in favor of methods designed to end conflicts quickly and decisively. Military academies across dozens of worlds were teaching courses on total war theory and human tactical doctrine. Most significantly, the civilian populations that had been forced to defend themselves during the war were not returning to their previous peaceful ways. They had learned that safety could not be guaranteed by others, and they were determined to maintain the ability to protect themselves. Militia organizations continued training and expanding even after the threat had passed. 2 years after the humans had walked out of the council chambers, a formal request was sent to human space. But this time, it was not a demand for military assistance or a plea for humanity to rejoin the old galactic order. Instead, it was a proposal for something entirely new. Ambassador Zixith had been chosen to deliver the message personally. He arrived at the human border in a small diplomatic vessel, accompanied only by a minimal staff. The massive defensive platforms that guarded human space allowed him to approach, but he was escorted by ships that made his vessel look like a toy by comparison. The escort ships were sleek, deadly-looking craft that moved with impossible grace. Their hulls seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and their engines produced no visible exhaust or energy signature. They were clearly the product of the technological advancement that humanity had achieved during their isolation, and they were unlike anything in the Council's databases. Zixith was brought to a space station just inside the human border. The station itself was a marvel of engineering, combining defensive capabilities that exceeded most Council battleships with facilities that suggested it served as a major administrative center. The message was clear. Humanity had not been hiding during their isolation. They had been building. President Sarah Chen received him in an office that was notably simple compared to the elaborate diplomatic chambers that other galactic leaders preferred. The furniture was functional rather than decorative, and the walls displayed technical readouts rather than artistic works. It was very human in its emphasis on substance over appearance. Chen looked older than she had 2 years earlier, but she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had guided her civilization through a fundamental transformation. When she spoke, her words had the weight of absolute authority. Ambassador Zixith, I understand you have a proposal to discuss. Zixith had prepared carefully for this meeting, but facing Chen in person made him realize how much the balance of power had shifted. 2 years earlier, he had spoken to her as a representative of superior civilizations, offering guidance to primitive newcomers. Now he was asking for help from a species that had proven their understanding of galactic realities was deeper than anyone had imagined. President Chen, the Galactic Council recognizes that the previous approach to maintaining peace was inadequate. The crisis with the Kethvar Empire has demonstrated that the galaxy requires new methods of ensuring security and stability. Chen listened without interrupting, her expression neutral. When Zixith paused, she made a slight gesture for him to continue. The Council proposes a new framework for galactic cooperation, one that acknowledges humanity's role as advisors on matters of defense and security. We understand that Earth would not wish to rejoin the Council under the old structure, but perhaps a new arrangement could be beneficial for all species. Zixith had rehearsed this proposal many times, but saying it out loud made him realize how completely the situation had changed. The Council was no longer offering to include humanity in their civilization. They were asking to be included in whatever humanity was building. Chen was quiet for a long moment, studying the alien ambassador, with eyes that seemed to see more than he was comfortable with. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the same directness that had characterized her response to the original peace negotiations. Ambassador, 2 years ago your council told us that our methods were barbaric, and our understanding of warfare was primitive. You demanded that we compromise with aggressors and submit to oversight by species who had never successfully defended themselves against a determined enemy. Zixith felt his mandibles click nervously as Chen continued. You wanted us to be civilized according to your definition of civilization. You believed that being peaceful was the same as being harmless. You thought that compromise was always preferable to conflict. Regardless of what was being compromised or who was demanding the compromise, Chen stood up and walked to a window that showed the vast defensive installations surrounding the station. Beyond them, Zixith could see human ships moving in formations that suggested both incredible coordination and overwhelming firepower. We tried to explain that sometimes the most civilized thing you can do is be absolutely barbaric to those who threaten civilization. You didn't understand then. Do you understand now? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Zixith realized that his answer would determine not just the future relationship between humanity and the Council, but the shape of galactic civilization itself. Yes, he said quietly. We understand now. Chen turned back to face him. The galaxy learned something important during this war. It learned that peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is what happens when those who threaten innocent lives understand that the cost of aggression is too high to pay. She returned to her desk, but did not sit down. Instead, she looked directly at Zixith with an intensity that made him want to retreat. You asked whether we would be willing to serve as advisors on defense and security. The answer is yes, but with conditions. We will not rejoin a system that prioritizes diplomatic process over practical results. We will not compromise with aggressors who target civilian populations, and we will not accept oversight from species who have not proven their willingness to do what is necessary to protect their own people. Zixith nodded quickly. The Council is prepared to accept these conditions. Then we have a basis for discussion, Chen said. But understand this, Ambassador, the galaxy has changed. The species that survived the Kethvar War did so because they learned to fight with the determination of those who have something worth protecting. They will not go back to being helpless, and we will not allow them to be forced into helplessness again. As Zixith prepared to leave, carrying humanity's conditional acceptance of a new galactic framework, he reflected on the bitter irony of the situation. The Council had tried to civilize humanity by forcing them to accept compromise and diplomatic solutions. Instead, humanity had taught the galaxy what civilization actually required when faced with those who would destroy it. The humans had never retreated from anything. They had simply waited for the rest of the galaxy to learn a lesson that their species had understood for thousands of years. The price of peace is eternal vigilance and the willingness to fight with overwhelming force when vigilance is not enough. The galaxy was no longer the same place it had been before humanity walked out of the Council chambers. It was stronger, more dangerous, and more capable of defending itself. Whether it was more civilized was a question that would be debated for generations to come. But it was certainly more human in its understanding of what survival required.